what has been your favorite thing you've done in the pro wrestling media?
Hey guys, this is Tempest from Wrestle Talk, and I'm reminding you to support Tom Talks Rubbish.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Trash, and stand back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by Finn Martin from Inside the Ropes and the Powerslam magazine. So welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me. Yeah, well, powerslam magazine, as you know, hasn't existed.
It's long defunct, but it's something you did.
That's right, yeah. Inside the Ropes and Inside the Ropes magazine. That's who I work for now.
That's the one. That's
Yes.
the one. Yeah.
So how are you doing today? We've never spoken prior today. We've had much communication on Twitter, but we've never spoken prior to this day.
It's like you were someone. I'm really good, and I'm really excited to do this. You were someone that I was like, if you want to come on, I'd be really happy because I love your work. As someone that didn't grow up with the magazines but discovered them later, I was like, I wish these were around in I say generation. That sounds horrible, but do you know what I mean?
Well, no. Well, it is over 8 years. July 2014, the last issue of powerslam went out, so it is a long time ago now. So this is becoming increasingly frequent, and it really is. It's a real honor for me to hear someone say, "Oh yeah, discovered the magazine or discovered stuff that I've done historically now," because it makes you feel relevant. And when you get to my age, that's a great fear. Am I still relevant? Is my views still chiming with younger people? And it's something you have to be mindful of, and you always got to think about these things. Absolutely. So yeah, I'm pleased to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So if we take this back to the beginning, where do you first discover wrestling as a fan?
As a fan, well, I was born in '69, so I grew up with the old school grunt and groan. Mick McManus was still going when I was a youngster, and guys like Johnny Saint were in the business then. He was a big star, and Daddy and Haystacks, I guess their peak would have been around maybe 1980, 81, at which point I would have been 11, 12. So I vividly remember them. We only had 3 channels prior to the launch of Channel 4 in 82, I think that was.
I think so.
Yeah. So, and if you go back and look at the schedules, you look at old TV listings from the Radio Times from the old days, you'll find them online. And BBC Two would effectively shut down in the afternoon, or it would be Open University. There would be nothing on in the afternoon that anyone was really that interested in watching on BBC Two. So you had 2 channels. So of course everyone, lots of people watch wrestling because there was only 2 channels. There was obviously no internet. This was before video shops were even, launched. So, this is, people watch TV, absolutely still do now, but there was fewer entertainment options around back then. Hence, more people watch television because, what else were they going to do? But yeah, I watched British wrestling. I was not a huge fan. And I remember, seeing American wrestling or in films like Highlander. There was a wrestling scene there with the Freebirds. Obviously, I remember Hulk Hogan in Rocky 3. Wrestling scenes in movies and being fascinated by them. But it was really 88 when I became a fan of WWF. I saw it because back in, I think it was 87, I think it was, the Crabtrees lost the exclusive on the TV at the afternoon slot, and then it went to Dixon, and then they were showing WWF wrestling. I think it was once a month or once every other month. I can't exactly remember what it was, but WWF wrestling was on in the British wrestling slot on Saturday afternoons periodically. And I remember seeing Honky Tonk Man and British Bulldogs and Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, and just being blown away by the difference between these guys, obviously big budget,
in a previous interview,
huge
you
money
discussed
versus
it as,
British. Yeah.
in a previous interview, the comparison you made was watching a school play to watching a big budget film, or a West End
Yeah.
stage show. Is that
Yeah, that's
correct?
it. That's it. Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison. I mean, the budget was so much bigger. I mean, the lighting, the production, everything about it was bigger, bolder, brassier. And it was just, yeah, like watching a big budget Hollywood film versus, like an Amdram production or a production at your local theatre, with like a fraction of the budget. So, I mean, it blew your mind seeing the difference back then, because how else were you going to watch this? And then it was 88. I was on something called the YTS scheme, which was something that lots of us who didn't go to university went on in the late 80s in the UK. And someone there had cable. This was before Sky launched. Sky launched in 89. And he had cable TV. And he was a big wrestling fan. And he brought a tape of WrestleMania 4 in. And the match that really turned me into a fan was Demolition versus Strikeforce. That was the match. I remember sitting there and marveling at these guys. And there was a spot in the match where I think it was, I can't remember who it was, but somebody nailed somebody else's flying forearm. And we were like, wow, I never see anything like it. So that's when I officially became a fan. And this guy was called Mark Greaves. We became firm friends. And, I would talk to him about pro wrestling all the time. And he'd been watching it for a few years because he'd had cable. And, he was a fan of Crockett Promotions. And I think like Mid-South was broadcast. It was all sorts of American wrestling was shown on cable back in 87, 88. But because so few people had it, cable back in those days, this isn't particularly well known. And you had to live in a certain part of the country to even have access to cable before Sky launched in 89. So, but yeah, 88 was when I officially became a fan.
Yeah. So with that, how does watching no wrestling change to, are you consuming everything you can get your hands on at this point when you officially become a fan?
Absolutely. But at this point, I think this was before ITV started showing it late at night. I think that was maybe 89 or 90 when they started showing it, maybe 89. So there was no wrestling on TV. Well, after December of 88 was when British wrestling ended on Saturday afternoons. But after you'd seen the American stuff, and I was borrowing this friend of mine, he would tape it for me each week. I would borrow like he had like old WrestleManias taped from television and other events. So I would just borrow as much wrestling as I could from him to watch on VCR. But as far as what I had access to on TV, there was just British wrestling, which was on Saturday afternoons until December of 88 when it was booted off the air by Greg Dyke. So I would watch that, but it just felt like a pale imitation compared to, watching. It would have been Crockett at that point. I was more a WWF fan in 88, but did occasionally watch Crockett. I would watch anything, I was fascinated by it. I'm eager to learn as much as I could about the characters and what they'd done previously and what they were known as previously, and just working all these things out of like, what was going on with it, because the thing about American wrestling, as we know, is that they would have proper feuds that would build to big show matches. And this was something that did happen in British wrestling, but not to the extent that it happened in American wrestling.
As far as I know.
It did obviously happen. They would have big shows at Royal Albert Hall. There was obviously famous Daddy Haystacks match at Wembley. There was the Daddy versus Mighty John Quinn match. I think that was also at Wembley. So there were big shows. But with American wrestling, it was more, it was like they were always in this cycle of working to the next big show. And that was really exciting as a fan who'd grown up on British wrestling to experience that, because that sense of anticipation for the next pay-per-view, the next super show, it would obviously, the TV would peak just before the event. Then you would really look forward to the event, and you look forward to seeing, what the aftermath was of the big show that just taken place, whether it was WrestleMania or SummerSlam or Survivor Series or Royal Rumble. And you couldn't wait for that next, exhilarating installment of the soap opera. So it was an exciting time. But yeah, I was a huge fan, absolutely die hard. You know, I would bore people to tears talking about it, people who were interested in it. I never talk about wrestling with anyone who's not a fan now, ever, and haven't done for many, many years, because people aren't interested in it. But back then I was giddy. You know, I was a full-on, full-throated mark for pro wrestling.
With the way TV has changed, do you think that's a bit of a lost art in some ways, by having that anticipation for big shows?
Well, I think it still exists. I think it exists amongst younger people. I mean, in a sense, we're sort of spoiled now because there's so much product and it's available all the time. We can watch it whenever we want. And this is something that I know Paul Levesque brought this up in his interview with Logan Paul prior to SummerSlam, when they were talking about how the viewing figures are not what they were in 1999 or 2000. And it's like, well, back then, you know, you would position yourself in front of TV to watch the show because you either taped it, you know, or recorded it on if you had a VCR or you had a DVD player that did recordings, you either had to tape it or you had to watch it. You couldn't watch it on demand or online because, okay, the internet existed in 1999 and 2000, but this was pre-broadband.
Yeah.
People didn't really stream things back then because they didn't have the bandwidth to cope with it. So it was a different time. So there was more excitement about a show when it was on because you really had to see it when it was on, whereas now you can just watch it whenever you want. So it's just, you know, technology has changed. The world has changed. That's just the way it is, isn't it?
Yeah, so, definitely.
But I see what you mean. I see the point. In a sense, I think it still exists when there's a big show coming up. I think when WrestleMania happens, people are really excited about it and want to watch it live. I mean, I think there was quite a lot of anticipation for Clash at the Castle earlier this month.
Yeah.
Especially since, you know, because it was shown at a reasonable time in the UK. So I think it still does exist, but not to the extent it did. Absolutely.
Okay. So if we move on in your fandom, did you have like an off period at all in the 80s, or did you go straight into the 90s still as big a fan as you were?
Yeah. I mean, there were certainly moments where you question things. I mean, I remember going to see WCW or the Raw Power Tour at the Sheffield Arena, December 91. And I think it's about a 12,000 seat venue. And I don't know how many people were there that night. I think it was less than 1,000. Maybe it was 1,200, but it was just staggering to see how few people were there in that arena, because this was 91. The WWF craze was in full effect, and WCW was trying to capitalize on that, but they had very limited TV penetration at the time. They had the late night ITV slot, which I mentioned earlier. But I mean, that was just like a random selection of matches from various time periods. It wasn't like they were on weekly TV and were drawing huge figures and had huge buzz, as was evidenced by how few people bought tickets to that tour. But yeah, going to see WCW, I mean, it was a dismal show, and the atmosphere was just, I mean, I've never experienced anything like it, except for perhaps when I saw WCW. Well, I had never experienced anything like it. I would again from WCW in their legendary, infamous, notorious, was it February, March 2000? I think it was the March 2000 tour that they ran. And Manchester, and the main event was the Harris twins versus the Mamalukes. And that was pretty astounding as well, just how poorly received that was. But anyway, going back to the December 1991 show in Sheffield, yeah, it was just, you just couldn't believe. You were there and you're thinking, like, why am I here? I thought pro wrestling was really hot. And I've been to see WWF earlier that year at the GMEX in Manchester. And that was an amazing experience because it was sold out and fans were so enthusiastic and so, excited to be there, just to witness WWF live. But WCW just didn't have that buzz in the UK. It would in '93 after they'd signed Davey Boy Smith, and they had a Saturday afternoon slot by that point, weekly slot on Saturdays on ITV. So there's a lot more interest in WCW by March of '93 than there was in December '91. But yeah, there's a few points where your loyalty or your fandom your enthusiasm was questioned, came into, it would wane because of certain events that would occur. But pretty much, you would, because I'd been watching wrestling for long enough by the December 1991 show, I'd been a fan for nearly 4 years. You were resilient enough to be able to, tolerate one poor show.
Yeah.
If I'd only been a fan for like 3 months and this was my first live event, maybe my response would have been different.
From what I understand, 91 was when you got into doing magazines, correct? Or was when
that was 92. 92.
Oh, was that 92?
January 92 was the first issue of Superstars of Wrestling, yeah.
I do apologize on that. My research was clearly not as far as I thought. I do apologize. So in 92, how does the starting to do the magazine come into your life?
Well, I've been involved in the magazine business since October 88. I got involved in the magazine business. I worked for a guy in Morecambe. That was magazine production. And he was a publisher who it was very easy to publish a magazine back then, really easy to get a magazine in the shops. It didn't really cost you that much money to do it. And he had done very well out of BMXs, which was the BMX craze of the early 80s.
Yeah.
I had a BMX back then. I wouldn't say everyone did, but lots of people had BMXs. And he'd done magazines on various things over the years, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He did a magazine on them. He did a magazine on New Kids on the Block when they were like, huge for a very short period of time in the early 90s, but they were colossal. And he did well out of that. And I just sort of mentioned to him casually one day that pro wrestling was huge and that maybe he should do a magazine on it. And he got in touch and said, right, okay, we're going to do one and you're going to write it. So that was how it happened.
So when you're approached to basically be told, oh, okay, you want to do one, you've got to write it, sort of thing. What is your initial reaction? And how much experience with writing did you have at this point?
Oh, I had no experience of writing. I hadn't written anything since I was at school. I left school when I was 16. So I was completely clueless. And that will be obvious to anyone who looks at any issue of Superstars of Wrestling that was published in 1992. I mean, it's just, I can't look at those magazines. I just cannot look at them. They're so poorly written, but that was the best I could do at that time. So it was thrown in at the deep end. You know what? I asked for it. I suggested this. I proposed this to him, and he came back to me because I'd just gone self-employed at this point, so it was perfect timing for me. So I just set on my own business. So this was part of my business. I was actually a typesetter by trade, which is, I know that industry still exists to some extent, but that was actually a really good job at one point. You could do very well financially out of it. Not that I ever did, but I knew people who were doing well out the typesetting game. And but no, I'd never written anything, so I had some knowledge of pro wrestling, but not a lot really in hindsight. And it was the confidence of ignorance that carried me through. That just sustained me in these dark times. So
if something like that happened nowadays, where say you hadn't written the magazine, but Kenny from Inside the Ropes came to you and was like, right, we want to do a magazine, but you had no experience. As you've got older and maybe have more wisdom, would you have been so gung-ho to do it?
Oh, no, of course not. But I'm 52 now. I was 22 at this point, and you look at the world very differently back then. And, I just started working for myself. This was a huge gamble, like an enormous gamble. I'm sure most people thought I would fail. I'm not sure. I wasn't arrogant back then. I mean, in a sense, you could say, well, you were arrogant because you thought you could do this. But to me, my attitude towards it was, what else was I going to do? Yeah. This was an opportunity of a lifetime. Of course, I was going to give it a try. I wasn't going to like duck out or, make excuses. And I was going to do the very best I could to make this thing succeed. And that's what I did. And Superstars of Wrestling was a success initially because there was so much interest in pro wrestling that people would buy anything. And the fact that people bought that magazine, confirms that. So much part of a magazine of that standard now, people would look at it and just put it back on the shelf. They'd just say, this is laughable. I'm not spending money on this garbage. But things were very different back then. So, but yeah, it was, if someone comes to you and says, yeah, we're gonna let you write your own wrestling magazine, what are you going to do? Are you going to say no?
Definitely not.
Of course you're going to say
definitely not.
But I mean, at 52 now, because I'm older and wiser, I could do it now, of course, because I've been doing it for 30 years.
Yes.
So it's a bit of an odd question, really, but I understand why you've asked it. But back then, there's no way I could say no. And as I say, I'd proposed this. So it was like, well, you suggested it. Here it is. You're either going to say no. But now, as older and wiser, you'd look and you'd say, well, I'm not really qualified to do that. But that's because I've got other options in my life now. Whereas when I was 22, I had almost no options. So of course I was going to do it. My life is very different now. So, but yeah, it's, you look back on it and you think to yourself, well, you couldn't not do it, but it would have been really good if I'd had some advice, or I'd had more knowledge, or I'd had some practice as a writer and all these other things, but I didn't. So I just had to muddle my way through, and that's what I did.
From what I understand as well, from 1992 it was called Superstars of Wrestling till 1994, and then it rebranded. So what was the reason for the rebrand?
Well, the original publisher decided that he didn't want to be involved anymore. He was moving into another business entirely, which was more profitable for him. I think he ticked the magazine box, and even though the magazine industry was a lot of money to be made out of it back then, he felt like his future was in other businesses, in other industry, which worked out very well for him, by the way. So he just rang me up one day and said, Finley, it's not working. And that was pretty devastating. And then my business partner at the time, Colin Bowman, who would go on to do WCW magazine, we were working together on various things at that point. And he said, Finley, we can do this. And so we ended up having meetings with a company called Comag, which was a magazine distributor. And we went down to see them. We didn't really have much money to launch it. So they said, in order for the trade, as in the news trade, the magazine industry, the newsstand trade, to take this title, you really need to change the name of it. Because if you try and do a relaunch under the old name with no money to do a proper relaunch, they will not be excited about this title. So you need to change the name of it. So we were basically told that we had to do this. Didn't really want to do it at first, but realized that in order to do what we wanted to do, we had to comply. We had to go along with this. We bowed to their superior knowledge, and it was absolutely the right decision. So we relaunched it. It was 30 issues of Superstars of Wrestling. Last issue of Superstars of Wrestling went on sale in June of 94. And then issue 1 of powerslam went on sale in July of 1994 with Owen Hart on the cover, featuring coverage of King of the Ring 1994.
Okay. So what was some, when you got control of the magazine, what were some differences that you were like, okay, we're going to do this differently automatically? And then what were some things that you were like, I really want this to stay the same?
Well, it didn't change that much. In terms of editorial, it was pretty much the same. It was, different title, different cover, of course. Some of it changed inside, but mostly it was the same title. It was the same magazine in terms of content. The designs weren't really that much different. I mean, it was all done very hurriedly. There was no break between Superstars of Wrestling, Power Slam. It just went from 1 month to the next. So it was really difficult, I mean, it was the hours I was working back then was just absurd, really. It was a very strange life in hindsight. And, I wouldn't really wish it on anyone because the hours were, you just had no time for anything else. It was crazy, really. And, but that's what was required, and the thing is, alongside doing the magazine, we did the hotlines, which actually did very well financially. That was part of the reason why we continued the magazine, actually, because the hotlines were doing well. And also I was doing typesetting jobs on the side, which were not very well paid, but it was a little bit of income. And there was always that knowledge that it wasn't going to make it. There was that fear that Power Slam was not going to make it. And, that didn't go away for quite a few years. So if I was offered work on the side, I was doing that as well. So it was, most months I'd have like maybe one day off. And that was the way it was. And it was, 60, 70-hour weeks. That was the life. It wasn't really a job. It was a lifestyle. So, lots of friendships fell by the wayside as a result of it because you didn't have time for people, and I feel bad for a lot of the things, that I missed out on and wasn't able to do. And people who just, they say, oh, do you want to do this weekend, Finley? Or do you want to do this? Or well, let's do this. Like, well, I can't, I'm working. And after a while, people just stop asking. And, I don't blame them. And you feel bad, and you look back and, you wish you had more time for family members and things of that nature. And just had time for people in general. But, you made the best of it. And this was your livelihood. And in time, when Power Slam became more successful and then other people would come to write for it and photographers, you get more photographers working for it. It reached the point where it was a business that other people were relying on as well. So it wasn't just for you, it was for other people. So, it was, I'm glad I did it, but there was, some really rough times there. I mean, issue 1 did well. That was the Owen Hart on the front cover. Issue 2, Hulk Hogan on the cover. Had an interview with him.
Oh, wow.
That was to promote a WCW tour, I believe, in September of 94, which was headlined by Hogan versus Flair. And so we had the Hogan cover, we had the Hogan interview, and that did well also, issue 2. And then issue 3 was The Undertaker on the cover. And that wasn't actually a bad issue 3, but sales just nosedived. And then issue 4 was Road Warrior Hawk, or rather Hellraiser Hawk, as he was at the time, and Rick Steiner on the cover. And that was a dreadful cover. Looked awful. And a really weak issue of the magazine as well. And that did, I mean, we were really concerned. Like, really worried. We thought, oh my God, it's going to be out of business before the end of the year. And happily, the numbers, that was rock bottom in terms of sales for Power Slam. And issue 5 picked up slightly. I think that was Hogan and Flair on the cover with the Halloween Havoc 94 coverage, famous cage match, and Flair retired. Issue 6 was the first PS50. That was Bret Hart on the cover. Actually, a total shambles of an issue for reasons that would take too long to explain. And then issue 7 was Randy Savage on the cover. And that actually, at this point, we kind of reached a decent number of sales to the point where it was making money. Not much, but it was making some money.
Yeah.
It looked like it was going to be all right. So we looked like we're going to be okay.
From what I understand it was issue 40 that you really felt like the magazine had finally made it, if I'm correct on that.
That was the turning point, yeah. So 95, kind of stable in terms of sales. And I think what's important as well is that the magazine improved, because by this point I'd been writing for 3 years. By the end of 95, obviously 4 years. We had access to more photos, more information. We were able to get more interviews. I just was learning how to become a writer. Rob Butcher joined the team in actually 94. He contributed a lot to the magazine. So, always be grateful for his contributions to powerslam. But the magazine was just coming together. It was just feeling like...
Yeah, it was finally clicking.
Yeah, well, I wasn't muddling through anymore. I knew I'd found my style. I kind of knew what I wouldn't say I knew what I was doing totally, but I was able to write about pro wrestling with a hell of a lot more confidence than I could in 1992. So it was an easier job to do. I'm not saying easy, but it was easier because I've been doing it for 3-4 years by this point. 96, things were looking bad. In October of 96, I actually left Lancaster, where I was at the time, in the northwest of England, and moved to Maidstone, Kent.
Oh.
And the idea was, which was 292 miles away. I know this because I used to drive that. I used to do that journey about every 2 weeks. And the plan was I was going to fold the magazine in early 97, and I was going to get a job in London.
Oh, really?
Because Maidstone on the train was about an hour from London. I knew some people in Maidstone. So, you could have that sort of interaction with other human beings. I always worked alone, by the way. I should point that out.
Yeah.
I was in the office on my own all day and no interaction really with any other human beings during the day. So it was important to have, some sort of social contact with other people. And that was part of the reason why I moved to Maidstone. But then a funny thing happened in 1997. WWF went through this rebuilding program. WCW and obviously the NWO launch had happened back in summer of 96, but WCW was really growing in popularity. And the business just made this remarkable comeback, almost like a baby face.
I like that. That's brilliant.
This bizarre pro wrestling style comeback. And as the year rolled on, it was like, wow, sales are just edging up and there's all this confidence in the business and enthusiasm for it. And it just feels like it's got this buzz to it again.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, what's going on here? You've got ECW's got, there's buzz there and people are into that. And there's all these things happening and your sales of the magazine are creeping up each month. And then, it got to summer of 97. And the magazine had made enough money that we were in a position where we could spend some money on it and do a proper promotion, which is what we would have done with Superstars of Wrestling had we wanted to keep that name back in 94 and had the money to do the promotion. But of course, we didn't have the money. By 97, the business was, it was a solid business. It was profitable. And what you do when you're running a business is you reinvest.
Yeah,
that's just what you do. That's the way it works. So we did this promotion with issue 40. We did a little supplement. It wasn't a very good supplement, to be honest with you. And we spent a lot of money on, it's kind of hard to explain, but we spent a lot of money with the news trade. And they took more copies. We did these promotions in certain shops. And the whole idea was just really to push the title and get more people to buy it. So you remember, obviously, there was other wrestling magazines around in 97, WWF magazine and Raw magazine. Do you remember that? Was that before your time?
Slightly, but I have seen them because my dad had them, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Well, Raw magazine was doing well. WWF magazine had always done well in the UK.
Isn't it? Because they had if I remember correctly, sorry for interrupting you.
That's all right.
They had a kiddie version, which was the WWF magazine, or the family friendly version. And then the Raw magazine was the more hard, Attitude Era style, if I remember correctly.
You are absolutely right. I mean, they had the famous Vader cover from the Final Four pay-per-view where he was cut open and was really bloody. Mm. And they actually went for like a close-up headshot of Vader covered in blood as the cover, and it was they had this sort of Sunny fixation compulsion in 97. So she was featured on the magazine a lot, and that did work very well for them. But anyway, the point is, the point is that there was a lot of interest in wrestling magazines in the UK at the time. Raw magazine was doing well. WWF magazine was going bonanza, great guns. So powerslam wanted a piece of the action.
Yeah.
So we did this promotion. This is who we are. Give us a try. There's this little free supplement with the magazine. Give it a try. You might like it. And yeah, that was the turning point. Sales did go up, probably by a couple of thousand with that issue. I think we sold over 10,000 copies for the first time ever as powerslam with issue 40. And at that point, yeah, it really did feel like this thing was going to make it, was going to do well. And of course, this coincided as well with lots of things happening in WWF.
Yeah.
Issue 41, we had coverage of the Double Cross.
The Bret Hart Austin thing. Yeah.
Montreal Survivor Series 97. So we had coverage of that, Bret Hart on the cover. I Quit read the headline, and we covered the Double Cross. People were fascinated by that. They couldn't work out what happened. We were all just taken aback by that event. And then issue 42 was PS50. By this point, the PS50 has become, a much anticipated article, at least among the powerslam readership. Issue 43 was coverage of Sting versus Hogan at Starrcade 97. Okay, the show was terrible. The match was worse, but it was the biggest show in WCW history, and lots of people were interested in it. We get to, February of 98. We've got the Steve Austin, obviously Royal Rumble takes place in January of 98. So February 98 issue, we got coverage of Royal Rumble. We got coverage of Mike Tyson, Steve Austin angle. So there's all these exciting things going on. So it was a great time to cover the business because there was so much going on, and it was clear that there was a sea change.
Yeah.
That this was catching on. It was drawing a new audience, and that something big was happening. I don't think I anticipated how big it was going to become that year. I don't think anyone did, but we could tell that something was, something was happening. You could tell with Steve Austin that he had something that no one had really since Hogan. Back in like 85, 86, and that was before my time as a WWF fan, and obviously before my time as a magazine producer. But it was a very exciting time to cover wrestling because of how much was happening, and then that led us into the Monday Night War, and actually the Monday Night War had already been going on, obviously.
Yeah.
We're talking about WWF taking the lead in the Monday Night War, which was much bigger for powerslam and much bigger for wrestling in the UK.
Do you think your audience was primarily WWF people, or did you think it was WCW as well?
Well, it was both, really.
I say people, I meant fans. I knew what I meant.
Yeah. WWF was always number one in the UK, always.
Yeah.
So WCW, I don't think ever really came close to, stealing WWF's crown in the UK, although it was very popular at points. They should have done more over here. I think there was so much more money for WCW to make in the UK than they did make. They never really got the pay-per-view situation sorted out over here. They were never screened over here on a channel that we could all access, like live. They were on like the German channel DSF on delay. They never sorted it out. It was just a missed opportunity for WCW.
Yeah.
And they never toured during. I know they came over with Hogan and Flair in September of '94, and I don't think they came over again
till 2000, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. They'd done the two tours in '93. They'd done the real event with Davey Boy Smith, which was huge, and then they came over for the Halloween Havoc tour, which was the one it was on that tour that the Sedan fight took place. So,
scissors.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
We actually, a friend of mine, the aforementioned Mark Greaves and I, we went to the Blackburn show which was the day after, or the day, you know, the fight taking place in the early hours of the morning.
Oh, wow.
So that day, we went to the show, and it was lousy. I mean, not as bad as the Sheffield one. Maybe not. Maybe lousy is too strong a word, but it was mediocre at best.
Yeah.
Mediocre at best. And it was really funny, actually, because this Mark Greaves he was really disappointed by the show. He just felt like badly let down by WCW. And I persuaded him to go with me to the show. Oh, we've got to go and see WCW. We've been really good back at the Real Event tour. He hadn't gone on that. And I'd gone to the Manchester and the Birmingham dates, I think it was. And they were tremendous. And I told him how good they were. And he was like, oh, God, I wish I'd gone to the show. And then they announced the tour in October. He's like, right, I'm there. Let's go. So we went. And he was just bitterly disappointed by the quality of the action. But you got to remember, all the wrestlers were like basically in shock after what had just happened between Sid and Arn. But I mean, he wasn't really that bothered about it. It's like, well, you know, I've come along. Well, obviously, you know, he was bothered that happened. But anyway, it's kind of hard to explain. But the show wasn't very good, and I think a lot of that was because
of the incident the night before, or the early hours.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. So it really put a dampener on the evening, and you know, no one could say it was a good show. I mean, he was right about it. You know, he obviously was shocked by what happened, but he was kind of still hoping that the show would be pretty good because we spent quite a lot of money on tickets.
I can imagine.
And you know, that's the experience as a fan, isn't it? You've paid money, you want to be entertained. So I totally understood where he was coming from. You know, there was, I think, Flair, I can't remember who Flair wrestled. He might have wrestled Rick Rude on the show. Could have that wrong. But it was really just, I mean, it was like really, really limp, the match. Now, again, you know, Arn was his best friend at the time. So, I mean, the fact that Flair even went out there and had a match was a miracle when you think about it.
Definitely.
You know, it was definitely a strange night. Very, very strange show to witness. It really was. But yeah, WCW, I mean, they should have come over at the height of their popularity in 97. And like, there would have been, I've said this before, had they done so, and like, I think they would have sold out. I think if they'd done Manchester, Birmingham, London, I think they would have sold all three venues out. They should have taped TV. They should have come up and done a live Nitro. I mean, they really, really blew it there. And had they run like a 3-show or 3-event tour, even if it just been a house show tour, there would have been a lot of like sponsors and advertisers and potential business partners who either would have been there for the show or would have heard about how into the show the fans were and how much merchandise had been sold and et cetera, et cetera. And they would have been wanting to enter into business partnerships with WCW.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, you know, WCW's mentality was, well, we're really popular in the States. Why do we need to go anywhere else? That was the mentality. And it was just so narrow-minded when you look back on it. And they eventually did make it over here for the March 2000 tour, which was just a disaster. There was all these names advertised who weren't there because they'd just been through like another management change. You know, Bischoff had been relieved of his duties in September 99. Then Russo and Ferrara had come in October. Then Russo had basically gone home in January 2000. And it was Kevin Sullivan and, you know, this old school booking committee were installed, and they weren't really that enthusiastic about running WCW. And, you know, the talent was just, didn't know where they were coming or going. And a lot of people who were advertised for that tour just weren't there. People were up in arms about it. They were really, really angry. Yeah. She featured on Watchdog. People were so...
Really?
Yeah, so angry.
Oh, wow.
Because he just felt like they'd been ripped off, which they had. And obviously, wrestling promotions on the advert put at the bottom in the small print, cards subject to change. So that covers them legally.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? And obviously, occasionally people are injured, you know, or someone can't appear for you know, due to a family emergency or for, say they've been suspended or whatever. You know, there are obviously reasons why certain people cannot be on shows. That's always been the case.
Yeah.
That advert, like Sting was, all these stars were listed, and so few of them were there. And the
That's
substitutes,
bad.
yeah, the substitutes that they sent were just woefully inadequate in many cases, and people were just furious. I mean,
Yeah.
really, really upset. And WCW blew it again. But I mean, that's the story of WCW, isn't it?
Yeah. As someone that really watches the WCW through the WWE eyes now, because I wasn't really a fan during their height, it's like I can see why they went out of business, but come on, WWE, they did have some good moments. Come on now.
Oh yeah, of course they did. Absolutely. Yeah, they did really well. And it was a shame. I mean, it was a shame for the fans of
Yeah,
WCW.
definitely.
What I always say is that they really did give that company a chance to resurrect itself on so many occasions. It took a long time for WCW to run its fan base off. And even at the very end, there was a few million people per week who were willing to tune in to watch Nitro, less to watch Thunder, but they still had a really good TV audience. But by then, only a fraction of those people were willing to actually spend money on the WCW product, because they'd just been burned so badly by, the booking and, just the whole approach to everything. But had WCW continued, I think, beyond March 2001, it would have been very difficult to restore that trust that had been flushed by WCW. It could have been done. I don't think Bischoff was the man who could. I don't believe Bischoff would have been able to do it, because I just don't think he had the ideas. And also, I just don't think he had the hunger and the drive anymore, because he'd already been there. He'd already done it. He'd already been to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And by this point, he was a very wealthy man. And I just don't really feel like he had anything left to prove. And also, he'd become reliant on veteran acts. He wasn't
nostalgia, shall we say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He wasn't really into building the new stars, because it was easier to use an old star. And that's what got them into the mess in the first place. Obviously, that's what took them to the top of the mountain, by using Hogan and National Hall. I guess in National Hall in 1986 were still pretty fresh.
Yeah.
But by 99, 2000, they weren't.
No.
And neither was Savage and Sting or Lex Luger. I mean, they just felt like very dated acts whose time had been and gone. And certainly, if you contrasted what WCW was doing with what WWF was doing, it was like, wow, WWF's really got an atmosphere. It's got energy. It's got zest. It's got drive. It's got something. It's got this magic. And WCW just felt really flat and used up and worn out and tired and dated and cliched and all these other things. And it needed a total refresh and a revamp.
So with powerslam at this time, were you still covering both, or was
right?
Was it sort of the thing where you were like, one is making us money, so we're only going to cover the one? Or were you covering?
No, you covered everything. Covered everything. WCW, ECW, right up until the bitter end. Obviously, WWF was always number one, and they always had the lion's share of the covers, and they would usually have the most coverage in the magazine as well. But we cover Japan, we cover other promotions as well. Whatever there was really an interest in and demand from the readership for. I mean, for a while we were covering UFC. It wasn't get a huge amount of coverage, but we did cover some UFC shows throughout the years. So just whatever there was an appetite for from
So as we move on to it's 2014 that powerslam as a magazine ended, correct?
Yes.
So how does that come about, where it's decided that we're going to bring it to an end?
Well, I mean, the sales had declined. I mean, the magazine peaked in terms of sales, peaked in 2000, but as a business really peaked in 2006, 2007. That was really its peak. And I mean, it continued to do okay until 2000, maybe end of 2010, 2011. And then from that point forward, the sales were just in terminal decline, unfortunately. I was still making money out of it, not much in 2012. Done a lot of cost cutting, done a lot of the things you've got to do to try and keep the business going. And but by 2014, it just felt to me like there was no way that I could continue to do this magazine for much longer without drastic cuts. I would have had to cut everyone's money, which I didn't want to do. I had actually made some cuts to people's money in 2010, but not really that deep. And people, I think, were still very well paid right until the end. The only person who wasn't well paid right until the end was me. And I didn't want to have to ring people up and say, well, you're going to have to do that article for half of what you wrote it for.
No, because it's a business at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, you know, when you run a business, you have to make difficult decisions to do that. And if I was hell-bent on continuing to do the magazine, then I would have done that. And I would have cut the rates. I would have gone to cheaper paper. I would have found a cheaper printer. There was lots of things I could have done in order to preserve powerslam as an actual entity. But the reduction in quality would have been noticeable to everyone.
Yeah.
And that would have then led to a decline in sales inevitably, because people would have felt it's not as good as it used to be. I would have had to put my prices up, because that's what you do.
Yeah.
You know, you have to then charge your readers more. And I just would have had to have done that. And I would have been charging readers more for an inferior quality product. And I just made the decision that, I made the decision that it was just time. It was time to do something else. And I looked at July 2014 as exactly 20 years since issue 1 went on sale.
Oh, yeah. I never thought of that, but yeah.
And I just thought it's a good time to go out. It's just I wanted the magazine to go out and still be relevant. There's that word again. You know, I wanted people to feel like it was still, you know, a big budget magazine and still look good. I didn't want it to, you know, I didn't want it to just limp to the end. You know, I didn't want it.
Totally.
It's the old race to the bottom thing. So if you start cost cutting, doing all the things you've got to do to keep a business going, then, I mean, I just didn't want to do it. I wanted to do something else at that point. You know, it's very difficult in the last few years of powerslam, just maintaining your enthusiasm for what was still obviously really...
I was just going to ask you about that. How was your fandom at this point when it came to wrestling? Or did you start viewing wrestling as, this is part of my job?
Well, that happened many years earlier. That happened in the 90s, like many years earlier, because once you reach the point as a writer where you sort of realize that you could do this and you knew the business, and it takes a very long time to really understand the wrestling business, I think, and certainly it takes a long time to understand the magazine business as well. So there's all these learning curves that I was on in the 90s.
Yeah,
but certainly, you know, into the 2000s, I felt like I knew the magazine pretty well by this point, because I'd done a lot of different things, some of which had worked and some of which hadn't worked, I should point out. Obviously, there've been a lot of issues of powerslam along the way that I was not happy with, that were not, that should have been better. And there are just certain months where you do certain things, you try certain things and they don't work. And it's not that you've gone into it, you're approaching it with indifference or you don't care. It's just you've realized that you can't do the same thing again and again. You've got to try new things. And inevitably, some of them aren't as successful as you would have liked them to have been, or you imagined they would be. So there were certain issues that I was unhappy with, and you know that there would usually be a really good incentive for you to get it right with the following issue. Like, for instance, issue 108 was an issue that I remember I really loathed. Dreadful cover shot of Steve Austin. Guy who took the photo, not his fault. I just blew the picture up too big. It was like an old school print. But I blew it up so big on the cover, because obviously it had to fill the cover, that the picture just looked awful. And I remember it was just a weak issue for lots of reasons. You know, sometimes it can just be an uneventful month to cover pro wrestling. And if not a whole
imagine if you were still doing the magazine in 2022 is all I'm gonna say on that.
Well, I mean, obviously there's things that are very eventful now, and I'm involved in Inside the Ropes magazine, and we're covering them in great detail every month.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But anyway, my point is going back, to 2002, I think it was, issue 108 came out, and or 2003, and no, it would have been 2003. That's right. And there's some months where it was just not a lot happened, or people were injured, or they'd left, or all sorts of things were just going on that weren't conducive to you producing, an exciting magazine, or maybe the product was in a lull or whatever. There's all sorts of factors. So some months the magazine just wouldn't be very good. And but I always remember issue 108 just being it wasn't even mediocre. It was poor, that issue. And I remember issue 109, right, I'm going to get it right. I'm going to get it right this month. And issue 109 I just remember it was a really bright, vibrant, punchy cover. And we had some really good articles in that issue. And sometimes, putting out a bad issue, obviously, it wasn't
motivates you,
but it would give you that kick up the backside you needed. You're like, right, you're going to get next month's issue right. And then you look at an issue and you'd have some pride. Oh, yeah, that's good. And we could have done that better. And then you look forward to issue 110. Let's do this. Let's try that, blah, blah, blah. So, but I mean, as far as 2014 closing the title, it was difficult. I mean, doing that. I mean, it was a huge change in my life because I've been doing Superstars Wrestling Power Slam for 22 and a half years by this point. Some people I knew thought I was going to go mad because I wouldn't have that in my life anymore. And I didn't, I'm happy to say.
Yeah, definitely.
I almost did in later years, but I didn't go mad then. And it was sad that it closed, but I don't regret the decision for a moment because I didn't want to put out an inferior version of Power Slam.
You wanted to go out leaving people wanting more, almost.
Well, I guess you could say that, yeah.
And almost like you wanted to go out while you were still quality and not be like, the way I'll phrase it sounded like you wanted to go out on your terms and not have a distributor go to you, look, we're not going to take this out anymore, print this anymore. So you are...
That wouldn't have happened because I was in control. So I owned the magazine.
That's true.
Paid for it. I paid for everything.
I didn't know that. I do apologize.
I was the publisher. Well, what happened was, in 94, when we took the magazine over from the publisher, at that point, I owned it.
Right. I get what you're saying now.
So we launched it. We relaunched it. That's why we had no money for the relaunch because we were
right.
There, And then in 2000, I ended up buying out my former business partner, and at that point, it was, my magazine. So but nobody would have told me. In fact, no one involved in the production of it, particularly the printers, and certainly the magazine distribution company, which was Comag, they were urging me to continue running the title. Of course,
really?
Of course they were, because the printers wanted me to print it.
Yeah, as I can imagine.
That was $8,000 a month they were going to be out. They weren't going to be making out of.
Yeah.
They were charging me for doing the magazine, printing it. The distributors, they took a percentage of each copy that sold. So there was no risk to them at all.
Okay.
So that's the way it worked.
I do get what you're saying now.
Yeah, no one wanted me to close that title apart from me.
Yeah.
When I told it was like I had to ring everyone up, all the photographers, all the writers. I rang them all up one Sunday. I don't know how long I was on the phone that day. It was a long time, over 12 hours, I think it was. And I just rang everyone up and just gave them the bad news. And most of them knew it was coming. I think only one of them took it badly. The rest of them understood why I was making the decision. I'd like to point out every single one of them was paid in full, for all their work that they contributed to the title. I'm still in touch with quite a few of them to this day, 8 years later. And, I'm just glad that I was able to, pay everyone, pay all the printers, pay the magazine, pay everyone who was involved in the production process. Everyone who was a subscriber that wanted a refund received a refund. So I contacted all them individually and did refunds there. A lot of people didn't want refunds. They said, Finley, you just keep the money. I love the magazine so much. I appreciate the way that you've handled this. There's no need to give me a refund. So I was really touched by that. So, but yeah, it was something, I don't regret the decision, but it is still with some sadness. And, I'm just going back to that time now and thinking about it. And yeah, it was a huge change in my life. And, it was a big moment, really. And from there, I then started writing my first book, Pro Wrestling Through the Powerslam Years.
So how does that come about? Like, was that an idea you'd had for a while, or was that sort of like...
I've been thinking about it for a long time. Yeah. I mean, there've been a lot of times when I've been thinking, well, should I close the magazine? And certainly in that last 3 years, between sort of summer to the last moment when I thought that it might have a chance was the summer of Punk. Well, it wasn't even summer. It was about 3 weeks when he was really... It was only a very short period.
I always forget that, but yeah.
It wasn't a long time at all. And there was a huge spike in interest in... Would it have been July? I think it was
July was the pipe bomb. So
yeah, July of 2011. And I remember sales went up for issue 2 or 5, I think it was, and people were really interested in that. And then issue 2 or 6 went on sale, and we were right back to where we'd been with issue 2 or 4. And I remember realizing at that point that it was really, it was on borrowed time. And, it's just
the gas in the car was running out, shall we say.
Well, exactly. And the thing is, the world has changed. And this is happening to all magazines. They're just selling fewer numbers now. And, that's the way it is. And, a lot of people, not everyone happily, but a lot of people, sadly, feel like words should be free. I mean, that's just the mentality now. And that's the way people have grown up. And they think that the written word should be a free thing for them to read, and they shouldn't have to pay for it. And I'm very pleased that a lot of people still buy magazines, particularly Inside the Ropes magazine. And we absolutely appreciate all those people, appreciate everyone who's supported anything I've done, and other writers as well. I encourage people to, support writers of whether it's pro wrestling or whatever they're interested in. These people, this is their job. It's taken them a long time. If they're good at it, it's taken them a long time to reach this point. It takes a hell of a lot of effort to write these things, articles, and do these things well. And, have a spare thought for them. They've got bills to pay as well. So it's, but that was very much the mentality pre-internet. And even actually after the internet, people were still willing to buy magazines. But unfortunately, fewer people, buy magazines in these days. And, that saddens me as somebody who's been in the magazine business on and off since the age of 19 or 18. I just, I think it's really sad that the industry is where it is. But again, it's technology, and that's just, the world has changed, and you can't halt the march of technology as much as you want to. Things just change, and you've got to try and adapt and move with the times, and find a way to do whatever it is you're going to do in whatever the technological parameters are at the time. You've got to find a way to fit into that. So that's just the way it is.
So with writing your first book, how much did the experience of writing the magazines help or hinder you?
Well, I mean, I obviously knew what I was doing by that point, because I've been doing it for over 20 years. And it was a big project. I was under the impression, how naive I was. And I thought that I was going to have it finished in like 3 months. And it ended up taking me like 14 months. But or something like that anyway. But the thing is, when I closed Powerslam, there was a lot of things to sort out after that. There's a lot of things to deal with there. So and there was there's an urgency to get that done as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
To tie everything up and just, make sure everything was all done as it should have been. So I didn't really get started on the book probably until maybe August time, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 weeks after I'd finished the magazine. I can't remember exactly when I started on it proper, but there was a lot of things to do in connection with the magazine. So yeah, I mean, obviously I've been writing about wrestling. I'd written about wrestling throughout that period. So yeah, it was the perfect preparation for writing that book, but it was a much bigger project than I thought it would be. And I'm glad it was. I'm glad I spent the time on it that I did. Because, you want to put out the best product you can. And, I'd set myself, there's a self-imposed deadline to release this book in whenever I said October or whatever it was. I can't remember when I said I was going to put it out there. It was bloody fantasy. And to me, it was far better to take my time and get it
Definitely.
right, get it right. And so, yeah, but it was a big project, 240,000 words, the first book.
Wow.
So it's, a hell of a project. And there's all sorts of things in there, like the history of the magazine and, and lots of in-depth analysis of not everything that happened between 1992 and 2014, or rather 2015, but lots of in-depth analysis of all the big stories and the major players during that period. So yeah, I was pleased with it. I'm glad I spent the time writing, and I hope one day in future I've got lots more things like that I want to do in future, but at this moment in time, I'm very busy with Inside the Ropes magazine, which I'm very proud to be working for, and I'll long may that relationship continue, and obviously do my stuff with Inside the Ropes each week as well. And as you know yourself, just keeping up with pro wrestling in this day and age,
definitely, yeah,
product, that's takes up quite a bit of your week, just keeping up with it.
I am curious to know how your fandom has changed since stopping the magazine. Has that what's the word, invigorated your fandom again, or is it sort of still you view watching pro wrestling as part of your career?
I think I'm probably more into it now than I have been for a very long time. Well, I wouldn't say for a very long time, because I feel like I've been on a nice happy plane with plateau with pro wrestling for a long time now. There were certainly moments and occasions when I was running powerslam where, especially when, some really dark times for the biz, obviously there's a lot of bad things went on September, October 2002 with the whole Katie Vick thing and HLA and the billion. I remember just feeling really disheartened and kind of ashamed.
Did you cover like stuff like the Benoit tragedy? Or did you sort of leave?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That was June of 2007. Yeah, we covered that, in great depth in powerslam, and then there was all the follow-up and all the, signature pharmacy mess with all the WWE wrestlers being suspended when it came out that they were buying steroids and growth hormone from this online pharmacy, which was a violation of the wellness policy that they brought in after the death of Eddie Guerrero. So yeah, there was obviously lots of bleak times. If you go back and look at pro wrestling, between the end of the 90s and about 2008-9, the death rate was just unbelievable.
Yeah, it was.
And it's one of the huge, big changes in pro wrestling that I'm not sure whether people really talk about this now or they don't, but I think they should talk about it. And you can see the whole mentality and the whole mood and the whole, it's a much cleaner industry than it was. And that is, it's the whole culture has changed. And you go back to the late 90s, and using pain pills to mask your, the pain you were in and keep going. That was just mixing them with alcohol. It was somas. That was a big problem drug back in the late 90s and early 2000s, where people were.
I think that's what Shawn Michaels was on for his back. I think that's what his main addiction was. I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, they were obviously technically it's a muscle relaxer, isn't it? The Soma.
Yeah.
People would, if you take one, then it does what it's supposed to do. But if you take 3 or 4 or more, then you get high, and then if you mix it with alcohol, that's what was really dangerous. And lots of wrestlers were doing that. And I remember Rob Van Dam talking about this. I interviewed him several times in powerslam, and he was just like, this drug has just taken so many of my friends. And it's just, it's just such a terrible thing to do, to mix this drug with alcohol. But just generally, you go back and look at pro wrestling during that period, and there's so much drug abuse. It was just outrageous. And there was, because of how many people who died.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Happily, 2022, drug deaths now are a rarity.
It's very rare.
Very rare. And the culture has changed utterly. And I just think I'm so pleased that has happened. That has been one of the huge triumphs and unsung triumph of pro wrestling, not one company, but just pro wrestling in general.
Yeah.
It's a much cleaner business now than it was. But yeah, obviously I covered the Benoit thing, and all the after effects.
I wasn't sure if it was if it was just in front of camera stuff. That's why I asked.
Yeah, it was. No. So we covered all that stuff. All the back. I mean, people are much more interested in what's going on backstage generally than what's going on in the ring. I mean, that's why people bought powerslam, to read all the gossip about what was going on. Read the interviews, whether it's with, the famous Shane Douglas interview from way back in '96, which was, really what put powerslam on the map as a magazine that did serious interviews. I'd done several interviews prior to that. Obviously, I mentioned the Hogan interview. I'd interviewed Cactus Jack for Superstars of Wrestling, interviewed Roddy Piper way back in '92 for Superstars of Wrestling, although I didn't really know what the hell I was on about at that point, so it wasn't a very good interview. But I mean, by '96, the famous Shane Douglas interview that we did, it's in the powerslam interviews volume 1, by the way, if you want to read it there. I did 2 other books after pro wrestling through the powerslam years, 2 compilations of powerslam interviews with loads of new interviews as well, and stories on all the people that I interviewed as well. So there's lots of original material in those books. Even if you've got all the powerslams, there's lots of original material in those books. So excuse me. Yeah. So, but yeah, the Shane Douglas thing, he'd been there. Obviously, he'd had a very short run in '95 as Dean Douglas, which was an utter calamity.
Yeah.
But he was there when the Clique was there, who were terrorizing the company, and he was on the brunt of some of that because he was working with Shawn Michaels that year, and that was a fascinating interview. Listening to Shane Douglas, Troy Martin, just talking about all the backstage goings on. But that was what became powerslam's forte. That was what distinguished us from WWF magazine and Raw magazine, because we were writing about all the stuff that was going on behind.
Okay. So if we move on to your work of Inside the Ropes, how does that come about? How do you connect with the people at Inside the Ropes and start podcasting and making magazines with them, basically?
Well, I put out the second interviews book, powerslam Interviews Volume 2, and I was really on a downer with pro wrestling for lots of different reasons, and just decided I didn't want to be involved anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay.
And so yeah, there was a lot of reasons for that. I don't really want to go into them here.
That's
now.
fine.
I'll be writing about them again in one day in future. And yeah, so I stopped watching it, and that was really odd. And then I thought I was going to get a job in the real world, and that was really odd as well. And then what happened was Rob Butcher, who had worked for powerslam from '94, well, he'd actually started on Superstars of Wrestling. So he worked for the magazine from '94 through to 2000 when he left. He briefly came back in 2013, I think it was. He made some contributions that year to the PS50. He visited me. I think we hadn't seen each other for quite some time, and we were talking about pro wrestling, and I was just telling him, that's it, I'm through, I'm not watching anymore. And then we started talking about it, and then I came up with this idea for this book, right? I was just like, oh no, I felt like I've got to do this.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in, sort of thing.
Well, not really. Well, you could say that, the famous line from Godfather 3, and what an awful movie that is. Just terrible.
That's a whole nother podcast, but yeah.
Oh, dear me. Godfather 3. They did it for the money, didn't they? Read that.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Read that. Watch that interview with Robert Duvall. And he says, yeah, because he wasn't involved. Oh, he made the right decision. So we were talking about it, and I was like, yeah, it's like, oh God, and I was like, I just started thinking about writing this book. And I'm not going to tell you what the idea is, because I may do it one day.
Fair enough.
Do this. So I was just feeling like, it just felt like there's this void in my life, and it just felt like I still had something to say about pro wrestling. And I think it was actually that day I started watching it again. And I think the first match I watched was an Okada versus Kenny Omega match. And I thought, right, I'm just going to watch that. And I was like, I really enjoyed it. I thought, right, I'm going to watch some of WrestleMania, 2017 WrestleMania, because I hadn't seen that. I'd stopped watching in March. So, right, I've got to watch. So I started watching the matches and just started imagining what I would write about them, what I would say about them. And then I'd done, I think, 2 interviews with Kenny to promote my books. And then he put something out there on Facebook. He just left What Culture. And I just got in touch with him and said, how are you doing? And he said, yeah, I'm doing all right. And then he said, well, do you want to do something together? Because I've done podcasts with Wrestle Talk.
Yeah.
Podcast with Wrestle Talk from 2015 through to, I think it was the beginning of 2017, like on and off. And so I'd done quite a few podcasts. I wouldn't say I was really that good at podcasting at that point. And to me, it's definitely still a work in progress. But I got a feel for it, I felt. And he said, do you want to do a podcast? And I said, yeah, all right then. So I think about 2 weeks later, we recorded our first podcast. So that was that. I was back into it.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, is the Powerslam podcast? Or was there something before that?
What is that what we called it? I think that's what we called it from the start. I think it was. Yeah. So, but it felt right from the start. And it just felt really good to be back covering pro wrestling again. It just felt like there's a huge void in my life when I wasn't watching wrestling. And I probably only stopped watching wrestling for it was like mid-March through to, I think, very early May. So maybe 6 or 7 weeks.
Oh, wow.
But that was all. But it felt very strange, because you know how much time in your week goes in. Anyone who watches it. I mean, it's just it doesn't consume you totally, but it's a huge investment.
I don't know if you watched everything they wanted you to, it might.
So, and obviously, to me, I always enjoyed the times when it get you down a bit, but there was always something in pro wrestling that you would enjoy, even if you were doing the Katie Vick angle or something, John Cena was destroying the next up and comer or whatever else was going on that really brought you down. There was always something going on in pro wrestling that you could cling to and say, oh, that's really good. Oh, that was tremendous. Oh, that was so well done. And oh, it's going to lead to this. Oh, I can't wait to see, how that develops. And, there was always something to enjoy somewhere.
Yeah.
So, there was always that sort of enjoyment of watching some, or at least most of it. So to start watching it again just felt like, yeah, this just feels right again. And some people kind of laugh when they say, oh yeah, I stopped watching it for like 6 or 7 weeks. And like, well, that's not very long, is it?
No.
It actually felt like a very long time to me.
Yeah.
Because of how much of your time is invested in watching pro wrestling each week.
Yeah.
And also it's not just watching it, it's keeping up with it. I wasn't keeping up with it either. So there actually are still a few little voids from that period, like stuff that happened that I'm not 100% sure of what was going on, but enough time has elapsed now that it doesn't really matter. It
No.
did at first because like, oh, well, I wasn't watching then. And if you're doing a podcast on something, you're supposed to know what you're on about.
Yeah, pretty much. So with your podcast with Kenny on Inside the Ropes, how evident was your chemistry to do the podcast right away? And how different is your on-camera chemistry to your off-camera chemistry?
I don't know really. I mean, I think from the beginning they went pretty well. I'm not sure really. I mean, you'd have to ask other people that. I'm marking my own homework here, aren't I?
Yeah, true.
Telling you how good they were or weren't. I mean, that's for other people to decide, not me. But I mean, it felt like we had a rapport from maybe like week 2 or 3. I think I felt like, yeah, we're onto something here. But I'm going to say the podcast with Wrestle Talk, I thought they went well also.
Yeah.
So, if you can do this, you find a way of.
Why did the ones with Wrestle Talk come to an end?
Sorry?
Why did the ones with Wrestle Talk come to an end?
I was just told that the person I was the guy I was podcasting with didn't have time to do them anymore. That was it.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Just wanted to fill that gap, to be honest with you. So
I think that's the way it ended anyway. So I think that was how it played out. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you've been involved with powerslam for many years now. When you were first doing the magazine, did you envision that it'd go to another media? I think media is the right word, and become a podcast.
Well, I mean, I remember everybody always thought when you think of podcasts, you always think of Colt Cabana, don't you? He was the guy who really popularized them, I think, in pro wrestling.
I would agree.
I think that's fair to say. So I don't know, really. I mean, I remember doing an interview with the BBC in 2014 after the Ultimate Warrior died. I remember it was really short. It was only a really short interview with them. And I'd done a few other little interviews on like radio over the years. And I'm not sure whether I was any good or wasn't, because again, it's difficult to know. But I know I was certainly willing to give the podcast a try. Obviously, by mid-2015, I think the first one I did was 2015, could have been 2014. I remember feeling a lot of pressure before I went on and did the first one, whenever it was. And because, you didn't know what you were going to say. You didn't want to say the wrong thing. You wanted to be engaging. You wanted to be chatty. You didn't want to talk over each other. You didn't want to just regurgitate the same thing. And probably during this recording today, some of this will be familiar to people, so I apologize for that. But there's only a certain number of ways I can tell the same story.
No, and my fans might not know. So
yeah. So, but I mean, I think it's something that you've just got to. Again, it's all about technology. I was talking about earlier about you do a magazine. Right, a magazine, this is your industry, this is your business, this is how you make your money, this is how you communicate with the world. You do it through a magazine. Then when a magazine is not the forum through which, or the media through which you communicate with the world, it's podcasts. So you've got to adapt. You just have to. Otherwise you become yesterday's news, you become a dinosaur. You
were saying at the beginning of this, relevancy.
You've got to be, absolutely, that's it. You've got to move with the times. I mean, I remember when I first got in the magazine business, and I won't go into too much detail here because it would take too long, but I was learning a particular way of doing the typesetting. And it was really quite complicated computer programming system by then. This was pre-Mac, pre-desktop publishing. And someone who was showing me what to do was telling me that someone she had worked with when she first got involved in the business was operating something called a linotype, which is like I guess it would have been big in the 70s, but it was a particular way of doing types, of setting the type for printing. And she was saying there's this guy that she'd worked with, and he was brilliant at this linotype, but he couldn't adapt. He couldn't make the transition to what was this system called Scantex, which was what I originally learned on. And he just couldn't do it. But he'd been brilliant at this old way of doing it, but he just couldn't get his head around this modern computerized way of setting the type to create layouts from which you make. Back then, you made plates, and from which you print magazines. So that really
stuck with you by the sound of it.
Really lingered in the mind's eye, that information. And I was just like, right, yeah, you can't be a dinosaur. You've got to move with the times. You've always got to do this because technology is constant. The only thing that stays the same is that, change is inevitable. Nothing ever stays the same. The only thing that stays the same is that there will always be change. But we don't know what that change will be, and you've got to adapt and find a way to fit in with whatever changes or improvements or advancements are made. You've got to go with it. You can't resist it, because if you resist it, the technology will just run you down, and that's just the way it is. You've got to find a way to make it work, and you've got to find a way for you to work in it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. So you talked about making it work and stuff. Do you feel like now you've found your place as a podcaster?
Well, hopefully, yeah. I mean, again, this is, this is for other people to decide, isn't it? You just got to keep and try and bring something. Hopefully, you're going to bring something new to the airwaves each week. I mean, you don't always, but you strive to do that, and try and be upbeat and humorous, maybe, and just try and make it entertaining. That's the goal of all these things, isn't it? Because if they're not entertaining, why the hell is anyone going to listen to them or watch them?
I agree. No.
So, but it's. I mean, who knows what's next? I mean, how long will podcasts last for? What will be the next trend? What will be the next?
It's going to be TikTok. I hate to say it. TikTok's going to take over the world.
Well, maybe. What will be the next invention that we'll all have to adapt to? I mean, something else will come along. It always does. And we've got to be ready for it and ready to embrace it. I mean, that's what you have to do with technology.
I agree. As we look at wrapping this up, because believe it or not, we've been going nearly an hour and a half. And I do want to be a bit respectful of your time. We're going to do a very quick segment now that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this is where I ask my guests their favorite wrestling match, favorite wrestling pay-per-view, favorite tag team, favorite wrestler's theme song, and favorite wrestler of all time. Basically questions that Finn might get asked on social media quite regularly. So now we have a place to be like, look, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So what's your favorite match of all time?
Favorite match of all time? I think probably Misawa Kobashi from March of 2003. I still think it's the greatest match ever held. It was a match in which Kobashi won the GHC title from Misawa. Just a historic match on so many levels. And if you haven't seen it, seek it out. It is online. You will find it out there. But to me, these two guys who, big stars from all Japan in the 90s, and just still could put a match together that just felt like this huge aura. These feel like stars, and it was a huge heavyweight match for this championship that meant so much. And it was Kabashi's coronation and his moment to become, figurehead of pro wrestling Noah. But to me, that's still the greatest match ever held.
Favorite pay-per-view of all time?
I don't really know. Couldn't really tell you. Maybe,
fair enough.
I made Canadian Stampede. I always really liked that from July 97. Not saying it's the greatest ever, but I thought it was an amazing show. And I just thought the main event with the role reversal of the Hart Foundation as faces and Steve Austin as the heel. And he's what a power pack performance. What a dynamo he was in that match. I mean, he was just so good. But yeah, really enjoyed that. I thought this year's WrestleMania was tremendous.
I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like a huge 2-night event, and neither event was too long. And I thought the entrances and all the big budget effects and just the whole spectacle, it just felt big budget, big and the biggest show of the year, which it was by a wide margin. I mean, WrestleMania has been the biggest show of the year for, well, I guess you could say Starrcade in '97 was the biggest show that year, but it's been the biggest show of the year really since it's
98. I'd say.
Yeah. So, but I mean, it's hard to really narrow it down to one particular event. But yeah, I'll go with those.
Favorite wrestler's theme song of all time?
I mean, I was always a big fan of the Road Warriors Iron Man. From the Black Sabbath album Paranoid. I thought that was tremendous. I thought it really fit their characters at the time so well. I've always got a soft spot for some reason for Donna Summer's Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert.
Oh wow!
I cannot tell you why. I really am. I'm not. I mean, I don't mind disco, but for some reason, I just thought that was a great song for Gilbert. I don't know why. What else was that? I mean, I always thought Austin's entrance theme with the glass and it was really
the one with the words or the one without the words?
Without the words. It was a really simple riff over and over, which was typical of WWF entrance themes in 98, 99. I always thought that was really good with the glass and people just went mad for it. I mean, and also Ric Flair's entrance music as well. The classic theme from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah,
was always
not his WWE one. No.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always thought. I remember when he worked for Crockett and WCW, Sting's original theme. I thought was really, really pumped up the crowd. And Lex Luger's as well from that era. I thought that was really good.
What about favorite wrestling tag team?
Favorite wrestling tag team? I mean, I suppose it's got to be. I mean, I don't know really. I mean, I always liked the Hart Foundation. I thought they were really good. It's like, it's almost like which was the team when you first become a fan. It's sort of difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
The modern team. In some ways, Jimmy and Jay Uso are really good. I think they're the best team in wrestling at the moment. I think they're amazing. With it's the character stuff as much as.
Thank you for not saying FTR. That's what normally comes up.
Well, FTR, I just feel like they kind of peaked. What I mean? Yeah, I just kind of feel like they're flat. And I mean, it feels to me like they kind of done everything they can in AEW now. I mean, what's really left for them there? I mean, presumably they're going to make them at Full Gear. Maybe they'll do a unification match there. But they've been really toned down this year, haven't they?
Yeah, I do agree with you.
This year, and lots of people, conspiracy theorists, were blaming that on the Young Bucks, who have obviously now taken a leave of absence, shall we say?
Yes.
But I mean, FTR don't really feel like the force that they were. But this is what happens at times. If a company's not getting behind you and pushing you and really giving you that time, and it's not just ring time, it's the interview time, it's the segment time, it's all the other things. And AEW doesn't really do that other stuff very well. It might do some matches well, but I don't really think it does the in-between stuff that well. And it needs to do it certainly much better with its younger acts and up-and-coming acts. It needs to give them more time to develop their characters, because that's, look at MJF, and Acclaimed have actually...
Even Max Caster, I was just going to say that.
Yeah, they've done well also because they've been given some time to develop the characters. And that's what they need in order to become stars. But yeah, maybe at the moment, Jimmy and Jay are probably my favourite team. I think, the stuff they've been doing with Sami Zayn is just A1. The Bloodline in general is, to me, the best faction in pro wrestling at the moment by a considerable margin. But yeah, there have been other teams. Like I always remember, if you started watching wrestling in '88 when I did, and you saw the Road Warriors then, or you saw any of their stuff from that era, and you saw how much their opponents had to sell for them, and they were there like with a massive roided up physiques and coming out, and they were really over, and they had that, Iron Man entrance theme, which was just really set the tone for their matches, and the spiked outfits and the face paint. And they felt like it's such an awesome act. I mean, they weren't actually that great as wrestlers, but that didn't matter.
I was just going to say, back then, we weren't interested in.
We weren't, yeah. And whether it's the Midnight Express or Tully and Ann or whoever was on, the other side of the ring, they were the ones who had to make the match and make the road warriors look like stars. But that's what pro wrestling's all about. It's all about cooperation and working together to make each other look good. When it's done, when it works and when it's done properly, that's how pro wrestling functions, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So, and then finally, as we wrap this up, who is your favorite wrestler or superstar of all time?
I mean, I don't really have an answer to that question. I mean, I've got favorites from certain eras.
That's fine.
I always think like Buddy Rogers. He's, to me, one of the greatest ever and so underrated. I mean, he wasn't at the time, of course. I think Jack Briscoe was just amazing in the 70s as a worker and could just do so much and was just this machine who could just work with anyone and have a good match with anyone. And Harley Race was amazing during that era as well. You go into the 80s. I mean, I really enjoyed watching Ric Flair's matches. People like Ted DiBiase and Randy Savage at his peak. 88, 89. The guy was just like a fireball. The guy was just like the energy he brought to each performance and the intensity in his face and his movements. You watch a match from his peak when he was at ringside and just look at all the stuff he did at ringside where he would especially when he was a heel. To me, he was better as a heel than face, but
definitely.
Face.
From what I've seen, he's definitely better as a heel.
But Savage say took a pasting from someone and went to ringside. He'd be arguing with the referee, arguing with the crowd. He'd be there just strutting around, and he just had this. It was just this sort of intensity to his moves and his movements that I can't think of anyone in wrestling today who can do what he did and could make what he did go as far as he made it go.
Yeah.
Now people just want to do so many moves. It's like, do fewer moves, but make each one mean more. And that's what Savage was the master of. Into the 90s, I thought Shawn Michaels was really good. Bret Hart in 97 was the best wrestler in the world. And again, not because of his matches, those matches were amazing. It was his character work. He took that gamble doing the heel turn. And that was something that some people thought, is this the right move for him? And it absolutely was. And Austin was amazing in 98, just, carrying that company, and lots of other people benefited from that. And I personally did as well, because Steve Austin's popularity and WWF's popularity, led to an increase in sales for powerslam. So I'd like to thank Steve Austin right now. But even later, in years, Randy Orton was always really good and very giving, and just a guy who made everyone look good that he was pitted against. And real shame that Orton's injured now. I mean, I thought he was doing the best work of his career.
So did I.
Yeah, I mean, I hope he can return from this, because he was on course for such a huge match with Roman Reigns. I mean, that would have been colossal had that happened at SummerSlam.
Yeah.
But sadly, he's injured. I thought it was a storyline at first, but obviously it's real.
So did I.
But yeah, lots of people. I mean, again, Misawa and Kabashi, I mentioned them earlier. I mean, those two guys were just, there was no one in there. Kawada was, to me, number 3 in all Japan in 93, 94, 95. But Kabashi and Misawa, you'd order the tapes you from your tape trader friends, and you'd be patiently waiting for that next Misawa classic, and you couldn't wait to watch it, and you'd wait weeks for it. And the videotape would be like, oh, can't wait to watch that. And this sense of anticipation of watching, Misawa's latest classic matchup, or this amazing spot that Kabashi did, and the psychology of those matches, the old Kings Road style, where everything was done for a reason, and the thought and the effort that went into the booking of Giant Baba's promotion back then. I mean, you think, oh, there's no angles, there's no feuds, there's no this, there's no that. But when you actually really understood what was going on and just how those matches were laid out, and then the rematch would take place, and what had happened in the previous match would be a factor in what happened in the rematch. And you're like, oh, he's blocked the move this time. Oh, that move pinned him last time, but he kicked out of it this time. The crowd go mad because they'd be studying it. And it was like you were given like a history lesson or something, right? Study that, learn this industry, learn what these people do, learn what these wrestlers' strengths are. And you would look at it, even though it's obviously pro wrestling and not a sport, you would look at it like it was a sporting contest.
Yeah.
Which at its heart is what pro wrestling in the serious big match is supposed to be. When we're suspending our disbelief, we're supposed to be watching and believing that this simulated violence is a real fight. Yeah. And that's what All Japan did at its peak, and many other promotions have done since, and many other promotions do to this day. But when pro wrestling is done properly or perfectly, or by two virtuosos with a booker who really understands his talent and understands how to get the most out of his talent, to me, there's no greater form of entertainment in the world than pro wrestling, when pro wrestling is done properly.
I fully agree. To be honest with you, my friend, I think that's a beautiful way to end it. But the question I do have, a couple of questions before we do end it, is what has been your favorite thing you've done in the pro wrestling media?
The favorite thing that I've done
in the pro wrestling media. So
obviously recording with you today.
Wow. Thank you.
I'm just kidding.
Rude.
I have no idea. I don't know. I remember having a real sense of pride when the first book went out, and it was on Amazon and Pro Wrestling Through the Power Slam years. There was a real sense of pride when I finished that, and that so well. I was really. But there again, you got to remember, I've been working on it for nearly 14 months.
Yeah,
so it was a big project. Previously, you would be on the monthly. You do monthly cycle on the magazine, so there were many issues that I put out that I was really pleased with. I remember like issue 236. That was actually the penultimate issue of the magazine. Was one that I was really proud of, because I'd had skin cancer the previous year, and I was going for radiotherapy. Yeah. When I was producing issue 236 of the magazine, so I'd had 20 doses of radiotherapy, which is actually not painful, by the way, and not tiring either. But it was very time consuming for me to get to my office to where I was having the radiotherapy and then get back to the office. So I had 20, treatments of radiotherapy while I was putting that issue out. So that was very time consuming. And I still got the magazine out on time, issue 236, Bray Wyatt on the cover. Still got the magazine out on time. And I was really pleased with the issue. And I think really that would be my greatest achievement as a magazine producer. But probably my greatest achievement of all was running a business that enabled me to pay writers and photographers and other people. I thought, and by all means, ask these people. And I think most people who work for the magazine will agree with this, even people who I fell out with. I always and I did fall out with some people over the years, obviously, but I felt like I always paid people well, and that to me, was my personally as a business owner, my greatest achievement, that I was able to run a business that was successful enough that yes, I did well out of it as well during the good times. Of course, I did, but I was able to pass that on, and I was able to pay the writers and the photographers and the other people who were involved in the magazine, I thought, really, very good fees, for the photos and for the articles and other things as well. And that's something I'm most proud of, and that everyone got paid at the end, and I didn't have to slash rates or expect people to pay for less than I thought they were worth. And that, for me personally, is something I will always be really proud of. Like, for instance, everyone got a Christmas, for many years, everyone got a Christmas bonus. And it wasn't just the photographers and the writers, it was the people who worked at the printers, it was the people who worked at the colour originators, it was the people I worked with at Comag. Thousands of pounds were paid out in bonuses for Christmas. When things were at the peak, people got an end of tax year bonus as well. So, that's something that I'm really pleased. I'm really proud of the fact that I was able to do that, and I was able to treat people as they should have been treated. And I think if you're running a business, that's what you should always strive to do. You should always strive to treat people fairly. And I feel like I did that.
Fair enough. So as we wrap this up, where can the good people find you on social media and or your content?
Well, the magazine is Inside the Ropes magazine is out this Thursday in the shops in the UK. So please check that out. itrwrestling.com. You can order it online. That's the website. There's all the information there. The books are available on Amazon. Pro Wrestling Through the Powerslam Years, Powerslam Interviews Volume 1, Powerslam Interviews Volume 2. They are ebooks. They're not actual printed books. But, I mean, you don't need a Kindle. You can download the Kindle app and read on any device. So there's those. And obviously, the Powerslam podcast and What's Going Down, the two podcasts that we record each week, you will find them wherever. You'll find them on all the podcasting places, all the usual places where you find podcasts. That's where they are. So, yeah, What's Going Down and the Powerslam podcast, I record them each week with Kenny. So please have a listen if you like. Well, you've been entertained by my story today. Hopefully I haven't droned on too long.
Oh no, definitely not, man. But it's well worth doing, guys. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Trash. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Trash. Follow bodyslam.net with Cassidy Haynes for the Wrestle Watch podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube for my show with Cassidy Haynes, the Wrestle Watch Pod. And follow the Wrestle Watch Pod on Twitter to help us pick the match that we're going to watch every week. And I will see you in the next interview. Goodbye.